Hello, it's Giovanna and welcome back to Happy Mum, Happy Baby. Before we start today's episode with Louise, I wanted to let you know that we discussed some difficult topics, including traumatic birth, as well as PTSD and anxiety post-birth. If you think that you might find this difficult to listen to, then please choose another episode. This conversation with Louise is also a really important one, and I want to share as much of it as possible with you. So we have decided to split this episode into two parts. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Happy Mum, Happy Baby, the podcast. Today's guest she appeared on our screens during the very early days of Made in Chelsea. Since then, she has gone on to create very successful businesses, and at the end of 2021, she welcomed her son, Leo. The birth was not straightforward, and everything since then has not been straightforward. She has written a book that is out called Lucky. Today, I'm very honoured, actually, to welcome Louise Thompson to the podcast. Hello.
Hi.
How are you feeling?
You know what? It's a really good question. Such a mixture of emotions, mix of emotions. I feel I'm very excited, actually, to share my story because it feels like something that's, I've had this sort of weight on my shoulders for a really long time and I haven't been ready. And it took me a really long time to be able to kind of process things for the first year and a half after having my son. And the only way I could really communicate about it properly was via writing. Yeah. But now I feel really ready to take that next step and to share and to open up conversations about things that might need to change. And just to sort of to talk about my experience, really my lived experience, and to be really vulnerable because I think that it hopefully will help other people, which kind of makes sense, makes something... It's finding something good out of something pretty horrendous that's happened to me. Mm-hmm. But I feel nervous, you know, I can't lie. Like, I feel a little bit anxious, and I'm an anxious person anyway. Yeah. And I don't have a lot of experience with the podcast, so you're my first podcast in person. So my heart is pounding. It's honestly pounding.
But I think it's one thing when you write down, because obviously it's such a personal experience, and the book is amazing. I have to tell you, I've read it over the last 2 days and I don't think I've ever cried so much in a book. The whole way through, I just felt this should not be happening. This should not be happening to someone. And I felt so sorry that was happening to you. So it's one thing to sit down and write it in the safety of your home and at your kitchen table, wherever you're writing it. And it's a different thing to then know that people are reading it and then you're having to talk about it. Do you know what I mean? Because when you're formulating those words and thinking about how you're going to put it down, that's safe in a way, even though you're having to relive it. But when you're on a podcast or when you're going to go on to Lorraine or This Morning, whatever those things are, suddenly it's a different kettle of fish, I think.
I think so, yeah. I guess you kind of nailed it. There is safety just in writing. Writing is easier anyway than talking, communicating verbally, because, you know, it feels private. And it's a huge step for me to actually publish it and then to go and speak publicly. And it's not, despite the fact that I spent, I think, over 10 years on TV and being in front of the camera, it still doesn't necessarily come that naturally to me. But as you said, and thank you for actually taking the time to read it, because I wouldn't necessarily expect everybody to do that.
Well, and Louise,
sharing.
If you're interviewed by someone who hasn't read it, I would literally stand up and go, meh. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a really important book. You know, it's a really important book, and you literally have poured your heart into it.
Well, as you said, it shouldn't be happening to people. And I think the crazy thing is that it still does. And especially, you know, I've always been really lucky in life. I've not faced a lot of adversity. My life's been pretty straightforward. I was good at school. I was popular-ish, like, you know, sporty, fairly academic, had a lovely upbringing, you know, got along with my parents, like, didn't have any major problems. I mean, obviously I had, like, some difficulties with alcohol and those sorts of things and some horrible relationships and stuff. But I just never could have imagined my life would take such a twist.
Yeah.
Nothing prepared me for it. I didn't have any resilience. I'd always been really healthy. You know, I was chatting to a friend last weekend who I haven't really seen in 3 years, which is weird because there are a lot of people I haven't seen because I've had to really remove myself from a lot of people. We were having a catch up and I kind of summarised what had happened to me to her as kind of quickly as I could. And obviously she's followed and she knows, but she was like, it's just so weird because at school you were the most robust person. You were someone, you ate all the crusts. Like you'd eat all the food on your plate. You'd go out and be like roaming around in the countryside. And I really was like the sort of vision of health. And I've done, the Women's Health cover twice. And I just was so healthy. And I didn't know any other way. I had no experience with hospitals. And so, yeah, then for everything to take such a significant turn was just unimaginable. Plus, I kind of sit in a privileged position because I was on TV. So some people knew who I was. And, I'm white, middle class, and I'm young. And so really, like, why, the odds were in my favour. And for this to all happen then, on the NHS is just kind of not good enough. And I'm in the process now. There are a lot of things that I've wanted to do to help other people. And actually, it has been the case that I've really had to fix myself first. And I'm sort of in a place now where I can do things.
Do you feel like because of all those things, because you're in a privileged position, it's almost like you have to talk about it? Do you know what I mean? You have to be the one to try and make a bit of a change for the other people that aren't in the position that you're in?
I don't feel any pressure to. So there's no one putting hot smoke up my arse.
No.
Hot smoke? Yeah.
Let's go with it.
Blowing smoke up my arse? That's a compliment. There's no one. Sorry.
I'm happy to go with that.
There's no one, there's really no one
forcing me
at all. And in fact, like a lot of people that are kind of in my circle and have protected me a lot, have said to me categorically, you don't need to share this. Like, you really don't need to go out there and do this. Yeah. But it's really, I guess my desire to do it started quite early on. The few people that did step foot through my door early on in my recovery, when I was at home after having Leo, there were sort of odd people that came and went. And I would talk about what had happened to me kind of to anyone that would listen, but they tended to be strangers at the beginning.
Yeah.
And they all said the same thing, which was, I know someone who knows someone who this has happened to, and you will use this, you will make something of this. Yeah. And that was something that did give me a lot of hope and kind of kept me going at a time when I felt really, really hopeless.
Let's go back to, so your childhood, your mum, your dad, and you and Sam.
Yeah.
How close were you as a family? Because you went to boarding school, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, so I went when I was 11. Sam went when he was 8.
Jeez.
Which is the same age as your middle son. Which is quite shocking, actually. Yeah. I think to a lot of people, especially nowadays. And I remember seeing him, actually. I was stood at the top of our stairs. We lived in Nottingham. I was going to say a really grand staircase, but I remember looking down at my tiny brother with a little peaked hat on and this whole uniform, sobbing because he was going to live in the country somewhere, away from all of us. And it felt weird because I was older than him.
Yeah.
But I didn't really question it that much. And I probably only had then like a year at home before I went, because I was 2 years older than him, and I then went when I was 11. And funnily enough, it was exactly the same time. So my parents got divorced one summer, and I went to boarding school that same summer.
Right.
And I almost respect them if that was, I haven't asked them, but if that was a conscious decision that they decided to wait until I had a fresh start, then I think that that's actually very selfless of them, because it meant that I was going to a new school, and I didn't have to explain anything. Like, my parents just went together. There wasn't the big, like, hurrah, no, not hurrah, but, the kind of big, like, spectacle.
Yeah.
And yeah, then off I went, and I kind of cut myself off from them, to be honest. And I don't know why. I don't know whether I resented them for sending me. I don't really know what it was. Maybe it was because I was probably harbouring some internal emotion because of the divorce, and I thought, it would just be a lot easier just to kind of push them away.
Yeah.
So I think I mentioned this in the book. I say that, or explain that everybody else would get loads of letters. They were all on the payphone speaking to their parents every evening. And I told my parents categorically, I said, do not write to me, because I knew if they wrote to me and I had letters handed out, there was a huge sack, like Father Christmas sack, where the teacher would dish out all the letters and we'd all sit on the floor in the common room. And I knew that if I opened a letter and I read it, I just wouldn't be able to contain my emotions. I'm a very emotional person.
Yeah.
Like I cry a lot. I always did a lot, even on, I think, Made in Chelsea. But it was easier to kind of keep the distance.
Yeah. How was time at boarding school? Would you say your childhood was a happy one? Yeah, it was. I think it was actually good for me. Really?
Yeah, because I'm very good at being told what to do.
Yeah.
I like following instructions. And that kind of served me quite well when I was younger, and then probably wasn't so good as I got older and realised I couldn't really do anything on my own.
Yeah.
But no, I had a good relationship with all the teachers, and I had some really amazing friends. I was very lucky. I know that it can be quite toxic, or there can be issues with boarding schools. And I think if I look at the year above me, and even somewhat the year below me, there were eating disorders. It was an all-girls school. So there was an element of kind of competition around things like that, which was really horrible to be around. I remember getting weighed and measured like twice a year, and that was odd.
Yeah.
And it can be a very bitchy environment. But for me, I was just really lucky. There weren't a lot of problems in our year.
Yeah.
By chance. Like, it was just a really good group of people. And I'm still really good friends with like a handful. I'm seeing one of them next week for lunch. I'm still good friends with actually a lot of them. But I slightly lost touch with some of those friends when I kind of stepped away and did the whole TV thing.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I wasn't accepted. And it's only more recently, actually, since having a child and kind of like changing my perspective.
Reconnected.
Yeah, on everything that I've massively reconnected.
When you were younger, did you ever look ahead to the future and think of yourself as a mum and having a family of your own?
No.
Really?
No. I always wanted to have children, and I wanted to have a big family, because some of my best friends were like one of 4 or one of 5, and I thought that was really fun. So I'd spend a lot of time. Well, I wouldn't go to my parents' house that much. I'd spend a lot of time at other people's houses.
Yeah.
And I loved that, like, big, like, everyone mucking, like the littlest one's just like left lying on the floor and just kind of learns from the older ones, and there's just a lot going on, and there are a lot of different personalities, and I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
So I knew that was something that I wanted, but in terms of the kind of wedding and the marriage, I couldn't really visualize it.
Yeah.
And I've never been someone that's had, like a little like scrapbook with magazine cuttings. Maybe that's just in the movies that people do that.
I think it is. I've never met someone.
I know,
but it's very Muriel's wedding.
I feel like I'm the alien, because I've never fantasized about a wedding.
Yeah.
And I'm still not married. And people ask me all the time.
Do
like,
they?
Friends
When's it going to happen?
Yeah, and I think because they're worried that I'm like planning a really small wedding that they're not invited to.
So they must keep asking.
Yeah, they always say, when are you going?
Just to show they're still interested.
Yeah, it's still a friend.
So before meeting Ryan, do you feel like you had any sort of, any sort of feelings of actually I want a baby now, or was that just not on the card at all?
I mean, before I had Leo, like, I really enjoyed life. Like, not that sounds bad, but I was out a lot. Yeah. I was partying a lot. I was traveling a lot. I was very selfish. Yeah. I was working a lot, and it didn't really cross my mind until probably lockdown. And I actually hate to admit this, but I think I was quite influenced by the fact that a lot of my friends were all getting pregnant. Mm-hmm. I think I was. I liked the idea of, like, our children growing up together.
Yeah.
And having said that, I mean, I had it. Obviously, it kind of dawned on me. It like loomed at the back of my head that it was something that I wanted, because when I look back now, I can see that I went to, like, completely randomly went to like a fertility doctor. And got like some tests done and the AMH levels and all those sorts of things. Yeah. Kind of a few years before I actually wanted to try for a child. Right. So
So on some level it was on
my
mind,
radar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I wanted some sort of security.
Yeah.
then it wasn't really until lockdown. And I guess we'd been quite relaxed in terms of contraception. So I started to, after a couple of years of not getting pregnant, you know, and everyone probably says this, don't they, that you spend like all your teenage years trying not to get pregnant. And then suddenly, like when you can't, when you want to, you think, well, there's obviously something wrong with me.
Yeah.
But then, I did worry that there was something wrong with me because it did take a while. But then the moment I did actually find somebody good, a really lovely gynecologist obstetrician, that month, then I got pregnant, and all I'd done is gone and stepped foot into his office and talked about my problems.
He just needed to offload.
I just needed to have a cry. And then he said, well, I think we did just the tests, so a blood test, and then we wait. And I think he gave me a prescription to start a pill that helps you ovulate. But I didn't take it, and I did get pregnant that next month.
Yeah.
And it didn't last, so I did have a miscarriage, which, you know, it's just sort of the beginning of a really crazy journey, because now if I look back and everything else I've been through, it sort of feels insignificant to me.
Yeah.
But it was really, really sad at the time. Like, it was really sad to, you know, when you see the positive test, it makes you realise how much you do want something. And to have that shared experience with Ryan and to see him so happy and so excited about something. Yeah. That then when that, you know, when I did have the miscarriage, it then was really, I didn't really know how to handle myself.
Miscarriage isn't something that is talked about a lot. Usually when you start sharing, if you share with someone that you've had a miscarriage, then you'll hear loads of other stories of other people that have. But I think unless you've gone through it, it's something that doesn't affect you. Do you know? It's not on our radar, I don't think. But it does make subsequent pregnancies tough mentally and emotionally, you know, wanting to almost protect yourself from the potential loss.
Yeah, I think pregnancy, having not suffered with a miscarriage, versus pregnancy having suffered a miscarriage, are two completely different things. That, and it's sort of stating the obvious, isn't it? But they're such different journeys. And it really did affect me, because I was very, very conscious that it could happen again. Yeah. I mean, I was very lucky, as you say. People don't talk about it a lot. It's not kind of dinner table conversation. Yeah. But the moment that I had one, that I did tell a friend, she then said, oh, XYZ, like, you know, these 4 other girls from school have all been in the same boat, and they've all gone on to have successful second pregnancies. So I'm going to get them to all message you. And then I had my people, and they were the people that I relied on, because they'd had a positive outcome. So it was that hopeful relationship. And I just asked them questions that I knew I was going to like the answer to. You know, it was, I really needed to kind of be as positive as possible. But yeah, it was really hard. I mean, I think I did a pregnancy test every day for the first 3 months, just checking that line was still there, that it was stronger, that it was growing. And I really listened to my body. I remember lying down and having a nap at 3 p.m. every day. And I don't know, which is such a luxury. It's ridiculous. And I speak to friends about this all the time, because a lot of my friends had really bad sickness during their pregnancies. And again, I suppose it was kind of convenient because it was during lockdown, so they didn't have to go to work. Yeah. But I have so much respect for women that work in an office in a really, you know, fast-paced, high-stress environment, typical working hours, whilst carrying a baby, especially at the beginning when you do feel really unwell, and at the end.
And a lot of people don't say anything at the beginning as to why they might be feeling like that. Yeah. So trying to hide it.
Struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just felt wiped.
Did that last most of your pregnancy, feeling wiped?
No, I felt really, really wiped and weird and a bit low at the beginning, and then I did feel good in the middle. Right. And then I did feel really bad at the end. Right. Really heavy. Really struggled to breathe. I fainted a few times. I didn't feel right at all.
Really?
Yeah. I felt really, really bad at the end.
And during your midwife appointments, you obviously started focusing on the birth.
Yeah.
And throughout those sessions, you repeatedly said that you wanted to have a C-section.
Yeah. Everyone's so different. I knew early on that was an option that I don't want to say was best for me. It was the option that I really wanted.
Yeah.
I'm very small. I've got the body of a 14-year-old boy. I have no hips. It wasn't an experience. I didn't want to go through the natural childbirth experience. It wasn't something that really appealed to me. Mm-hmm. And I was really worried about it. And I was really worried that my baby wasn't going to fit or come out of me. So I did, I mentioned it, every time I spoke to somebody. And it often was, they were speaking to a lot of different people. And the message was never really passed on. And, I definitely, there was an element of kind of having white coat syndrome where I suddenly felt like I was back at school whenever I was face to face with someone in the medical professional. I just felt like a child again, and that I couldn't advocate for myself.
Was there a part of you that kind of go, well, they know what's best? That person in that medical profession, you're kind of like, well, they do this all the time. Because I've often been in for like little things and, and whatever they say, yeah, fine. And then come out and go, but I didn't advocate for what I actually wanted.
That's exactly it. And it's not even that I think, they know best. It's just that it's all of your symptoms, everything just goes out of your head the moment you sit in that room.
Yeah.
You just find yourself nodding. You're like, yes, no, you're right. Yes.
But they wanted...
You agree with everything they say.
But they wanted you to do a home birth.
So that was so it was constantly positioned to me that was going to be the best option for me. I wasn't even living at home because from the sort of April, so I don't know, when I was 3 or 4 months pregnant, we actually moved to my mum's house around the corner. We were doing a renovation at home. There's just no way that was, I categorically didn't want to have a home birth. I don't know anyone that's had a home birth. Again, it wasn't on my radar. And that was what was really, really encouraged of me because I was low risk and young and fit and healthy and sporty, but it's not the point.
The opposite of what you wanted. I can understand if people had an aversion to hospitals or they don't feel comfortable there. I feel safe in hospital. Before going into my birth, I felt safe. Whereas for some people, hospitals aren't that. So they want to go for a home birth. So telling someone who has said repeatedly, I would like to have a C-section, that a home birth might be the better option for them. Yeah. It's just so polar.
I know.
You know what I mean?
And looking back, it feels so I feel so stupid. Like I really do. I do. It got to the point where, because I always went to the appointments on my own, which I think is pretty normal, I had to then bring Ryan to try and advocate for me, and still we were told no. And so then I started actually looking for things. So I was so I went for a few private scans, and there was a moment where, and I was then sort of comparing the scans and thinking, well, that scan, suddenly my baby shrunk, 3 weeks before the birth. I was trying to sort of fight my case for this C-section as much as possible because I just couldn't get my foot in the door. I didn't get to speak to a consultant. And even, I would go for the typical scans on the NHS, so the 12-week and then the 20-week, the anomaly scan and all of that. And every person I'd speak to, I'd say, I really would like to have a C-section. And often, actually, when I went for the scans, they would agree with me that was a good idea. And they'd say, yeah, just kind of put your case forward, just push for that. I think you should do that. But I didn't know which direction. I didn't know how to escalate it. I didn't know who was the person. Whose doorbell do I need to ring on to get the help that I need to make that decision? And it's only since, and I guess with it being somewhat still in that whole COVID-y phase, I didn't go to any NCT classes in person. Mm-hmm. I did, the only NCT stuff I did was online, and it was an NHS offered service. So that was where I was getting my information from. And again, it didn't really kind of give me answers as to, it couldn't have answered the whole C-section thing. But I think me and Ryan probably went into the whole birth pretty kind of clueless. I'm not an idiot, so maybe not clueless, a little bit naive. I would do things very differently now. And since, I have been looking into, there's a great website called birthrights.org. It is every woman's right to have a safe and dignified birth. You should be able to choose to have a C-section in this country. You should be able to choose the location of the hospital within reason. You just have to ask your GP and they can refer you to a different hospital even. And you should be able to choose your birth partner. All of those sort of simple things. But I just didn't know that at the time. I didn't know what was on offer. And I got to the point, right up, I suppose, really towards the end, where after I'd been involved in a house fire, I was desperately messaging some friends, asking them kind of what they did. And honestly, probably 20% of them had actually gone private. And they'd all had, so then, you elect what day you have your birth, whether that is a C-section or a natural birth. And a lot of the women that I know did end up having a C-section. So that kind of reinforced this idea even more in my head that was going to be the best option for me. Yeah, and I like to kind of feel like I'm in control.
Yeah. A big thing that happened towards the end of your pregnancy is the house fire. What a traumatic event to kickstart this whole, I know you said earlier about the miscarriage being the sort of the start of sort of everything, but the house fire, how far along were you when that happened?
I think that was the beginning of October, so it was really 3 or 4 weeks before I went into labour. Again, it's just I had no experience of anything like that before, except for seeing things on TV, on the news. And yeah, it was probably like 11 p.m. My mum had been out for dinner, so I heard a fire alarm go off, and I assumed that she'd set it off because she'd come back. And so for that split second, I thought, oh no. Because I'd heard fire alarms, when you're at school, there were always fire drills if you're in offices, shops and stuff, and there was never a fire.
Yeah.
So obviously I just assumed there wasn't a fire, and then it was only a second later that I knew there is a fire, because really quickly the environment changes and there was smoke flooding the entire house, just rising. And it's not just smoke. It's not smoke that you can... It's not typical smoke. It's really thick. And when I'd seen things on TV, I sort of really ignorantly thought, oh, okay, well, if there's a fire, maybe I'd be someone that could escape. You just run down a corridor, you can escape, jump out of a window. This is a house that I'd lived in for a while, so I knew it well. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. You can't see where you're going. And without that, you just feel like all of your senses are just kind of shut down. So I definitely went into a kind of a state of fight or flight then. Did run downstairs, managed to escape, and I literally ran into the street in my pants and a t-shirt and was just screaming. And Ryan and my mum took longer to come out because the dogs actually were sleeping in crates, and they had run out. So no one could find them in the house, which was petrifying. He actually did go back in then to find them, and it was a wine fridge in the basement that had blown up. And I was really worried that I was going to go into premature labour then, because I was in shock. My whole body was honestly convulsing, and we were kind of lucky we had a car outside, so we sat in the car and turned the heating on. It was really cold in kind of October time. And then it was the whole like ordeal really, with the fire engines and the
But with
ambulances.
the stress of that, then suddenly not having, your own home's being renovated. Obviously you're all unable to live in your mum's house by that point. So there's so much going on going into going into labour. There's so much.
So much. And I think I definitely hadn't processed the whole fire thing. It was significant enough for it to really jade me. We were living in a hotel for a little bit. We just suddenly, when we left the hospital, we just didn't know where to go. Obviously, we have friends and some family members, but we just didn't. It just was that really odd thing of just not having anywhere to go that night and not knowing what to do, and turning up to the hotel just kind of really smelling of smoke, and just when Brian's his whole head was like white with I don't know, smoke. So it was not a great starting point, and we did then move into my dad's flat that he normally lives in, but it's only a one bed, so he moved up to York with his girlfriend. And Ryan and I, it was a really odd time. Everything, it's like little things that just went wrong, whether it was, I would take a jam jar out of the fridge and it would smash on the floor, just fall out of my hands and dent the floor in this flat. The dog ran away. Like a few days later, I took him to Battersea Park and he ran away, and that was really, really distressing, especially being so pregnant and not knowing what I was going to do to find him.
Did you feel like anything calmed down after the fire, or was it literally, did you feel like you were able to settle, to nest, to kind of think about what was to come?
We didn't really have the opportunity to nest, I don't think. I did go back to my house that I was doing up, and it was the one room that was sort of the only room that was basically going to be livable.
Just live in the nursery.
Yeah, so we
just put a microwave in
there.
We
really considered it.
Yeah.
We should have done that, but I probably couldn't have even used a microwave a month later because I was cooked. Yeah. But yeah, we kind of got into the whole, like, literally me, Ryan and my mum sat on the nursery floor and we were like, okay, let's build some furniture, and built some cots. And I mean, I wasn't doing a lot of building, but that was it. And then I think we did have like a little bassinet thing at my dad's flat. And I think Ryan went out to the shops to buy some stuff from Boots for the hospital bag. At that point, I just sort of like, I was just so, I'd kind of just resigned. I think I was just resigned to the sofa thinking, well, I was frantically then trying to like call people to figure out how I could still have the C-section.
Right.
And then questioning whether I needed to like change the plan and suddenly speak to somebody or like pay somebody. I don't know. And I was sort of just told that I had, anxiety because this one lady I spoke to, she said, oh, well, have you got anxiety? Maybe you're not sleeping. We could prescribe you some promethazine, which is just like an antihistamine kind of sleeping tablet. Right. And I was like, this isn't to do with sleep. Like, none of this is to do with sleep or just going and grabbing like a hot cup of tea. Like, I don't feel right. I feel displaced, and I feel that I'm not being listened to. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be. And the crazy thing is I even have, so throughout my pregnancy, I had a WhatsApp with I've got two phones. It's the worst decision I've ever made.
But what was the idea behind the two different phones? One business, one life.
Yeah, but my life is business.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a complete, like, the worst idea. Everyone just thinks I'm an idiot. I had like a WhatsApp group with myself between both of my phones. It was more just throughout the pregnancy. So I could I was just tracking like things. So how I felt, like baby kicks, that sort of thing. I reread, looking back on that WhatsApp group, that I'd actually written myself a message saying, I'm really worried about childbirth. I'm really worried that I'm going to die.
And that's not something that everyone would write down.
It's a horrible foresight to have. But yeah, I guess all it does really is it explains like how heightened my state of anxiety was going into the birth. And then I did go into labour on my due date, which is what I thought might happen.
Where were you when you went into labour?
So I was at my dad's flat. Yeah.
And what happened to kick things off?
I was having a shower and I thought that my waters had broken because I felt loads of stuff flooding out of me. And then I think we went to the hospital and we were sent home. I think that happens quite often. And then I had something else really horrible come out of me. And it might have been a mucus plug, but it was a lot of something really rough, like really red and brown and like just horrendous. Yeah. So we went back in, and by this point I was in a lot of pain anyway, and the contractions were really bad. So I went into the hospital, and it was a weekend. Yeah, I kind of was put in a room, and there wasn't a lot of support at all. And one of the ladies who'd sort of been in the area where we'd like checked in, I guess, did come back to sort of check on me before she went home. They have the 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. shifts. And she was like, she just looked around and was like, why is no one helping this woman? Why has no one got like why has no one offered her gas and air, or told her what her options are? There's like a ball over there. Maybe she could sit on that, or like get a towel or something.
How weird. It's like no one knew what they would do. Like, why? That's such a normal thing for midwives to do.
It felt really dark.
Even at that point.
Yeah. And the pain actually was excruciating from the beginning. Like, I didn't know my arse from my elbow. I was in a lot of pain, like unimaginable pain. And I think that pain kind of slightly took me to a different place. I just didn't know. I couldn't really communicate very well. And bless him, Ryan, it was our first child. He didn't really know what was going on. He decided that that Ryan likes writing actually as well. He's like better at he loves writing letters and cards and stuff. He's really good at that. He decided that his contribution to the birth was going to be writing an account of the birth, so like a whole like journal of everything that was happening. So he's just sat basically on a chair writing for the best part the entire thing, obviously up until things then get really serious, and he is then thinking, well, this is turning into a kind of a nightmare. But yeah, I don't know whether we weren't firm enough. I knew that I did need an epidural because the pain was shocking. And unfortunately, that took a really long period of time to be administered. And there were several failed attempts at that. And that was really, really tricky. It was really, really hard, like waiting and waiting and waiting for that to happen and then for it to work properly. And again, it didn't fill me with a lot of confidence, the fact that people couldn't do it. And finally then that did work, and I was kind of like landlocked on the bed, still in a lot of pain actually, and everything just sort of wasn't good. Do you know what I mean? It was the sorry, I need to take a deep breath because it's a lot. It's a lot.
And actually you wrote in the book that there was a point where you felt like the birth was slipping away from you. It was kind of...
Like I couldn't even imagine it happening and being okay. Like I couldn't imagine the baby coming out of me. I had no, that kind of didn't even feel like the end goal anymore. They broke my waters and there was meconium in the waters and I could see that and nothing really was being done about that. And there was a lot of faffing and, there's a lot of, this isn't quite right, and temperatures and blood pressures and all of that. But the advice was just kind of to keep going, and I think that seems to be a bit kind of a common problem. And what I really still wanted to have a C-section so that we could get this done, and I was becoming more and more worried that it wasn't going to work naturally because I wasn't progressing. Nothing was happening except for the fact that I was still in pain, even with the pain relief. And I'd started to kind of almost, I felt like I was sort of tripping out, like... I didn't feel great mentally. Like I felt like when Ryan was sort of talking to me, I could kind of hear everything played back afterwards. It was really, again, that was very scary.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that was just like huge amounts of like adrenaline or like cortisol or something that my body was releasing, or if it was a reaction to the gas and the air that I finally had been given. But my body was all over the place. And I had a couple of, I think, doctors, maybe junior doctors, registrars, who would come in occasionally and kind of just, it was their main goal to keep encouraging me just to stay there and to keep going. Yeah, and I kept saying, I really, really want to have a C-section. I really want to have a C-section. And it was, and I don't know, and I don't have answers as to whether this is the case. I don't know whether it's a case that there wasn't any availability for that to happen. So it was then when there was a shift change in the morning that an obstetrician came in and she said, she tried to manually get him out and he was back to back. He wasn't coming out, like his head was lodged in my pelvis, and it was just kind of awful. And the only way that he was going to come out was to go to theatre. And I was hugely relieved at that point.
Okay. Because by that point you must just go, finally.
Yeah. I've waited 9 months for this.
Yeah. And also you must think, in half an hour this is going to be done.
Exactly.
There must be part of you that's kind of,
Yeah,
thinking.
because I'd known that that's what other people had done.
Yeah.
That, some people had to have an emergency C-section, half an hour, bam, and then you get you hopefully get to meet your baby, and that's the resolution, like the end of the line. And it ended up being hours long, the operation instead. So, yeah, which I could never have foreseen. And unfortunately, I was awake for the whole thing.
Honestly, Louise, when I read this part of the book, the blood splattering on the screen, the divider, first off, the fact that you then, Leo came out, you didn't see him, he was taken away, the fact that you were awake while blood is pouring out of your body, no one is checking in on you to tell you what's going on. What must have been going on through Ryan's head during all of that? Like, my heart just, like, I wanted to cuddle you whilst reading that book. I couldn't believe what I was reading.
I know. I mean, thank you. It doesn't feel... It's taken me a long time to even think about how wrong it is that I was just awake throughout the whole thing. I think that that's probably where a lot of my issues then came from later on when I was recovering, because it was a long operation. And under what circumstances is a partner or a family member ever allowed into a heart operation, a brain operation? You know, and I've spoken to other women since who have had complicated deliveries who have been put under general anaesthetic, and I don't know why I wasn't, because it's a lot for the human brain to have to witness, to actually, like, you know, full cognitive functioning, to see it all, to hear it all, to smell it all, to see the faces, the panicked faces around you, like the clattering of feet, like I could feel shaking hands. I mean, the whole thing, I was so... And also not to be able to run away from it, because it's obviously the human instinct to survive, and everyone talks about fight and flight, but they rarely talk about freeze, which I guess is what I've struggled with quite a lot, because I couldn't move. Like, I couldn't run off the operating table. I couldn't do anything to keep myself alive. The only thing that my head was saying was just breathe, and maybe in the next minute it will be finished. And I was just turning to Ryan all the time, asking him whether I was still alive, because I couldn't quite understand, like, how this was happening to me and how I was still alive with all of the chaos in the room. And
And essentially, for anyone who doesn't know, essentially, you were cut somewhere that you shouldn't have been cut.
Yeah.
And you were literally...
Yeah, so my uterus was like an elastic band, or like a balloon that they'd sort of wrapped all around it. They're supposed to just cut, you know, layers in and make an incision, I suppose, where they pull the baby out, which is just a straight line, but mine sort of went all the way around and nicked something down on my lower left side. And the bleeding was just non-stop. And there was, unfortunately, and I guess this is kind of indicative of what was to come then later on in my recovery, but there was a bit of false hope kind of halfway through, where because I honestly thought I was going to give up. I was like, I can't do this any longer. Like, can we just put an end to this? And Ryan asked them, you know, how much longer it was going to last, and they'd said, oh, we're nearly done, we're stitching her back up, and so 15 minutes. And then that wasn't, because then something else had happened, and they were like, oh, no. So then it was kind of a further large chunk of time. And that was really, really difficult then to kind of just keep like, you know, experiencing. And when it finally was over, I then don't remember anyone. I didn't recognise anyone in the room. My body was just being moved onto what felt like a metal table. And I thought that I was dead. I thought I was in like a morgue that was, you know, I was on a trolley that was being wheeled around, because I didn't see Ryan. I didn't see, you know, any of the surgeons that had come in, a couple of extra people. I mean, there was a whole room full of people, and there were a lot of people kind of coming and going. And I didn't have a moment to even think about whether I had a child that was alive or not.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, you know, one of their kind of instinctual questions is, oh, do you feel really robbed of that kind of skin-on-skin initial baby contact thing? And I haven't even, because I feel like I've had so much other stuff to think about.
Yeah.
It hasn't even crossed my mind, you know. Now it is starting to, because I might never be able to get that opportunity back. You know, it's very unlikely that I will have, you know, any more children. So it's just horrendous, really. And sadly, it doesn't actually, it doesn't even end there, because it then gets worse.
Yeah, it absolutely gets worse. While you are still in hospital, do you remember going to see Leo for the first time? Do you remember, after the surgery, sort of, I want to say coming round, but you were still awake or being more, with it, I guess, in terms of like processing. I mean, you're still processing now because it's such a barbaric and awful thing that's happened. But in those initial moments of kind of being somewhere, being still, what was going through your mind?
Basically, my mum came into the room. The news had obviously been delivered to her that this had all happened. And she came in and was shouting. She's not a shouty person. And I think she was swearing, saying, like, what the is going on? Like, what's happened? And I have, like, a bit of a memory of that. And then I think, my memory of, like, that very, very initial kind of, like, half an hour is pretty muted. And then I was moved into a side room. And then I kind of became a lot more with it, if you like.
Yeah.
And that was a really scary place to be, because I suddenly was that's when you're then not being operated on. So you're having to recover. You don't really know what's happened. There's not been a lot of explanation. You have to trust the people that are coming in and out of the room. You have to trust that they've been filled in on what's happened, because I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't really, again, and I'm not a medical professional, so I couldn't be the one to go, I used to say if someone had come in at the beginning or end of a shift, and it was scary going into like a 12-hour night shift. I'm not the one doing the night shift, but I'm at the receiving end. Really trusting that someone was going to help me if something went wrong. And I felt like I was so weak and just so petrified. I'd go, I promise you, like, this is not, it's not like a normal case. Like, I don't know what you know, but I'm really scared. Like, I'm not good. Like, and the pain was awful.
Do you feel like you were taken seriously with how much pain you were in?
No, not with the pain. And I think that's something that actually the hospital during my birth debrief, which followed many, many, many months later, years later, they've said that is an issue, and they need to listen to a mother's pain levels better. And it's really hard, because how can you listen to someone's pain? So subjective.
Yeah.
They're not listening, they're not living in someone else's body. And also, unfortunately, because some people have a really easy and wonderful childbirth experience, the spectrum is so wide. It's not like, if 3 people have a heart operation, the chances are they'll share a lot of similarities when it comes to the recovery. Whereas that doesn't translate across to obstetrics.
By this point, you aren't recovering from a birth.
No.
You're recovering from major surgery. It's very different. It's not a straightforward C-section that you're recovering from at this point.
No, and I
different.
should be somewhere in a high dependency unit, or in like a managed, like manned, warded bay with people that have extra experience. And that actually, there was one of them, but I wasn't put in it, which is again something that's not right, because they have like a certain ratio of staff to patients. And also there is just a better level of care there. And my room was here, and that bayed area, I think of 6 beds, is just there. And I got to know that other area later on when I was readmitted into hospital, and that is exactly where I should have been.
Right.
If not even somewhere, somewhere with even greater care.
Yeah.
So it was incredibly isolating being in a side room that some people pay for. I think it's £100 a night that you can pay for to go in this. It's still like part of the NHS kind of facility. But it wasn't a choice for me. Yeah. I was just put in there, and kind of then the door is shut, and then that's that. And you have a buzzer, and it's, sometimes people don't come in immediately, and it's a...
Did you feel almost forgotten about in there?
I did feel forgotten about. And... I think maybe it's like a bigger issue, isn't it? That when you're being treated in hospital, you get to speak to somebody once a day, and they'll tend to come around between maybe 8 and 10. So you kind of got to build up all of your questions ahead of that moment in time, and you've got to get everything answered in that window. But this wasn't something I was considering at the time, because I was so unwell when I was there. It really still felt like survival. And Ryan, and I was so scared, so Ryan actually couldn't leave, so he had to sleep on the floor because there was no way that I could handle being there on my own, because sometimes when I was in excruciating pain and I couldn't get pain relief quickly enough, I couldn't move, I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand up, I actually couldn't leave the bed, and I couldn't look after my baby. And they did move him from NICU to the room after a number of days, and I just couldn't, I felt completely incapable of looking after him.
Can you remember meeting Leo for the first time?
Yeah. Yeah, I do, and it's funny because you have no idea what this thing is going to look like from scans and things. Yeah. And then the moment I saw him, I knew that he was my baby. I was like, that's exactly what my baby is supposed to look like. Yeah. And that is such a cool feeling, being like, you are mine, you are me, and we do share the same DNA. And that was really, really special. And actually because Ryan had been able to move, he'd gone to see Leo before me. So I had seen just a picture that he'd shown me before on his phone. And that made me feel really emotional. But I felt like I couldn't I have some pictures. I feel like I wasn't doing the parent stuff that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I was still very scared. So, and I had the cannulas and things in, and so did Leo when he was in NICU. And it wasn't what I'd imagined at all.
No.
So I sort of felt like I was acting, like I was trying to smile and trying to be kind of, trying to do the things that I'd seen other people do in pictures. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wanting to hold him and get like a nice photo and, connecting and then breastfeeding. But that wasn't what was running through my head, really. Yeah. I was doing that because I was being watched. Yeah. Because Ryan was there and I needed to bond with my child. Mm-hmm.
But in your head, that's not where you are at all.
No, I all I could think about was myself and the fact that I felt like I just felt really not okay.
Despite the fact that you felt really not okay, that you couldn't walk, you couldn't sit up, you couldn't do anything for yourself, you were discharged after 5 days.
I know.
You must have been like... You're letting, generally people when they leave with a baby, they're a bit like, oh my gosh, you're letting me leave with this baby, like I don't know what I'm doing. But they let you leave the hospital when you couldn't do anything for yourself.
I couldn't even think straight. I mean, also there are pictures. I know everyone's enormous. I mean, which is like, there are deceptions out there that suddenly the baby's out and your tummy's okay again. But it wasn't just like the body thing. My face was this big. My neck was, my ankles. I looked so unwell. I was grey. I was really sick. So swollen, and I was in excruciating pain. It was the pain. I was screaming, and I still then was allowed to go home. And I think, but I wasn't, sitting here now, you and I, with a kind of sane brain, our head on our shoulders. Yeah. It does seem ridiculous.
But again, it's
because I wasn't in that headspace.
If you're being told you can go home, okay.
Yeah, I didn't know any better.
And also, there's a comfort with being at home. I'm going to go back to my bed. That's normality. I want to get away from this scary stuff that's happened. I want my bed and that stuff. But the reality is, you were not well enough to go home.
No, that's exactly it. I wanted to go home because then I was away from that place. But it didn't really feel safe to be at home. And I feel like I didn't really have a chance to decompress at all, ask any questions. I did because of the pain, because I was kicking up such a fuss about the pain, because I couldn't hide it, because it was written all over my face. I did have a CT scan before I left, and unfortunately someone did come into the room and say that no one's available to read the CT scan. And then, again, it wasn't my prerogative to chase up on that the next day, because it was only then much later on that I've learned how to kind of deal with the system. I would have questions and notes and everything written out and to get answers and things. You get so caught up in the moment when you're in hospital as well. Anyway, it's a weird environment to be in. But I left. And I'll always wonder what, might have happened if I hadn't been discharged. I imagine that the major hemorrhage that I then had later, 2 days later, would have still happened. But I would have been in the right place.
Well, if someone had said the scan, then maybe the hemorrhage wouldn't have happened because they would have seen.
And done more diagnostic testing.
Yeah.
Which I believe is what should have happened.